Indigenous Cultures Available to Save Humanity by Raquel Urroz Canán. Audiobook. Las culturas autóctonas disponibles para salvar a la humanidad, de Raquel Urroz Canán. Audiolibro. Traducción y locución en inglés por Daniela Mena. Translated into the English language and narrated by Daniela. Chapter 2. Economic Development and Social Organization of Mesoamerican Peoples. Roads and Trade. The great ecological diversity of this territory led to the creation of trade networks among different communities. This aimed to combine the products from each region through the complementary exchange of goods. First, villages developed local markets, tianguis. Then, specialized merchants emerged from neighborhoods. And from there, pilgrimages were organized to celebrate fairs and establish sanctuaries. Regional trade and long-distance trade networks began to form, ultimately connecting the entire Mesoamerican region through a system of roads. These roads should be understood as instruments for the circulation of relationships, ideas, products, and knowledge. They were traveled by tamemes, or food porters, who carried loads on their backs, using a mecapal, traversing mountains, valleys, coasts, and descending into lowlands and tropical areas. Through our relay system, they covered an average of 25 kilometers per day, carrying around 23 kilograms of goods on their backs until they established contact with other communities. After approximately 30 kilometers, they would experience changes in climate and vegetation, gaining access to the diversity of tropical products or raw materials specific to different ecological zones. Cotton, salt, chili. A variety of fruits or flowers were products from specific natural areas sought after by high plateaus or colder regions. For transportation, since ancient times and as major corridors, navigable rivers such as the Usumacinta, Candelaria, Papaloapan, or Coatzacoalcos were used. Through these rivers, regions of ecological diversity were connected, and canoes loaded with goods were able to move. For example, in the Chiapas, Guatemala highland, communication networks were established through natural waterways like the Grijalva, Usumacinta, Motagua, or Candelaria, through which amber from Soconusco, Guatemala's feathers, and cochineal from Oaxaca could be transported. The diversity of natural resources resulted in the material expression of Mesoamerican cosmology. The way they understood and constructed the world was embodied in great artistic, architectural, and technological achievements, such as the roads and trade networks. It is a fact that, faced with such natural wealth and biodiversity, the ancient peoples of America did not require large-scale exploitation of metals or the use of wheeled transportation. Unlike the historical development of the Eurasian continent, which had developed bronze, iron, livestock, and animal traction for thousands of years earlier. Indo-American cultures had their own cultural evolution in which the entirety of their needs was fully satisfied. Through distribution routes and the production of goods, different peoples were able to communicate and integrate their cultures. These cultures attributed equal value, uses, and meanings to their material culture, which was associated with their practical and spiritual needs. In the Mesoamerican world, there existed a network of communication composed of various road systems. This network allowed the transportation of raw materials and luxury goods, connecting different regions of the territory. Obsidian, for example, was a crucial lithic technology that moved from Honduras and Guatemala to the rest of the cultural area. Jadeite, highly valued as a symbolic precious stone, came from the Motagua Basin. Cocoa, on the other hand, traveled from the Pacific coast to the rest of the Mesoamerican territory. One of the earliest peoples to specialize in long-distance trade was the Maya Chontal, who linked the central highlands with southern lands through exchange ports, either through the interior of Petén or along the Gulf and Caribbean coasts, from Cozumel, Tulum, and Chetumal to some ports in Honduras. Furthermore, at some point in the early historical development of Mesoamerica, certain boundaries were reached in terms of obtaining and utilizing diverse goods. For instance, turquoise circulated from Chaco Canyon in the Colorado Basin to Alta Vista and La Quemada in Zacatecas, and from there to Teotihuacan. It could also travel from Arizona through Casas Grandes and Paquime in Chihuahua, and Schroeder in Durango, and then be distributed throughout the Puebla Mixteca region, Chichen Itza, and even Costa Rica. Urbanism and water management. The movement of traders, raw materials, and manufactured products was concentrated in commercial centers and political capitals, from where routes could branch out, forming regional and supra-regional networks that established the necessary economic, cultural, and industrial connections. This development, of course, is closely linked to urbanism, another great achievement of Mesoamerica. The cities and their structures are the result of architects who planned and built large urban centers with ceremonial centers made of volcanic rocks, whether basaltic, andesitic, or granitic. Additionally, the management of water was fundamental for social development in the great Mesoamerican cities. Through hydraulic works and agricultural engineering, high levels of productivity were achieved, leading to the emergence of large centers with concentrated populations around ceremonial complexes. An example of great urban planning was Teotihuacan, with its network of drinking water canals and regular layouts from which it was distributed to the rest of the urban space, including administrative centers, ceremonial palaces, and multi-ethnic neighborhoods. In reality, throughout the ancient history of Mexico, there was a succession of increasingly intense and sophisticated agricultural systems that allowed for the proper utilization of water reservoirs for planting and cultivating the land, even generating a cycle of production after another, not only relying on rain-fed agriculture, but also through irrigation systems. An example of this is what happened based on the existing natural conditions in the Central Highlands. This sort of central plateau is structured by mountains and volcanoes that connect with adjacent valleys, and from there to lowlands and the coasts on both sides. In word, the Mexico Basin was once predominantly composed, in its geographic structure, of water, which allowed its people to develop techniques for irrigation in fertile areas. It involved a hydraulic agriculture primarily composed of canals, irrigation ditches, and terraces, which, in turn, made it possible to achieve a climax in urban development. Even in the case of dry soils, human excrement was used as fertilizer, while in swampy soils, chinampas were built, enabling the cultivation of a wide variety of crops. The Valley of Mexico, transformed into a basin, developed a hydrological cycle around which the rains from the slopes of the surrounding mountains drained. Part of the water infiltrated into the subsoil and part reappeared as springs. Both forms of water nourished the saturated lakes that acted as closed aquifers. As a result, the river system in the basin did not form rivers, but rather created streams that fed tributaries, causing cracks and ravines. These, in turn, produced brooks or streams that could even evaporate, while salts accumulated over thousands of years. Thus, based on Lake Texcoco as the guiding axis of the basin's landscape, a cultural ecosystem was culturally shaped, where the area was integrated thanks to its correlated elements. Ecological diversity and the landscapes of lakeside and riverside settlements, which utilized various resources, not only agricultural, but also sourced from the lakes, forests, and different environmental niches. For example, in the riverside plains, deposits of lime minerals were cultivated, while to the south of the basin, the rainfall and temperature regime was favorable for the cultivation of crops. This was the case for corn, chili, and beans, which were extensively planted around rural villages and the islets of Chinampas. On the other hand, mountain settlements were established that cultivated fields of maguey, prickly pear cactus, and agave, precisely in the dry soils of the barren slopes. Additionally, the slopes of the surrounding mountains were gradually covered, utilizing the streams and springs to be channeled into agricultural terraces. Even today, remnants of this can still be recognized in Milpa Alta, for example. The indigenous peoples and their coexistence with the land and water, as an inseparable duo, show us lessons of survival, care, maintenance, and conservation. In essence, they demonstrate a balanced and respectful relationship with their habitat. Even today, natural sources are not exploited or depleted, but approached in a healthier manner, as these spaces are considered an integral part of their home, the home of all living beings. They do not intervene with invasive technology or polluting industries, primarily because the goal is not to generate money. The dialogue with the natural elements is taken seriously and conducted formally and responsibly through ritual language, aiming solely to transform nature into the most cherished ally and companion for future life. The neighborhood, foundation of indigenous economic, political, and social organization. The internal settlements or localities within urban sites in central Mexico were called calpulli. They were territorial segments that, as basic units of social cohesion, integrated a specific peasant community composed of masehualtin, or common people organized in extended families. Their corporate nature allowed each neighborhood to be centered around a patron deity and a profession under collective norms. They were linked by a common mythical origin or ancestry on the part of the ruling lineage, while for the members of the calpulli, these lineages could vary in their ethnic composition to coexist and inhabit together. Thus, under a political system that included land and peasants, the community was organized along a specific but dispersed stretch of land within the surrounding landscape. Therefore, in spatial terms, the calpulli did not have defined territories as they lacked administrative borders. Instead, the calpulli represented a combination of urban and rural communities that encompassed the built environment and the natural surroundings. In reality, each member of the calpulli coexisted in relation to the surrounding landscape, which included diverse environments. The larger regional unit was called Altepetl, which contained interconnected neighborhoods with a kind of lordship or city-state. As a major political settlement, it seemingly lacked clear organization and boundaries. However, it combined social and natural elements, configuring a ritual landscape where religious practices took place and where all surrounding elements of nature were integrated into sacred geography. The persistence of this collective social model is still perceived through the rituals carried out in indigenous communities. From a cultural perspective, the peoples in Mexico continue to shape and mold their environment to establish a connection with their powers, imbuing it with symbolic meanings that make sense as they receive benefits from both sides and engage in mutual feedback. Chapter 3: Mesoamerican Religion and Indigenous Spirituality. Animals and Nature. Pre-Hispanic societies conceived a pantheon of deities associated with the forces of nature. Ancient cult, in general, worshipped each living being and physical element within a ritual order and an annual structure of festivals that correlated natural cycles with social activities. First and foremost, it should be mentioned that Mesoamerican gods are entities with animal characteristics. In fact, every human being possesses an animal soul that serves to connect with one of these deities, even beyond death, as is the case with the dog, which acts as a guide for the soul through the underworld. The Xoloitzcuintle, Mexican hairless dog, knows the path for the deceased to fulfill the offering of funeral gifts once they have passed through the different planes. The dog, therefore, is a companion to humans in life and death. Death is not eliminated, hidden, or pushed away. On the contrary, death visits us periodically and contains the seed of life. This is a polytheistic religion where humans labor multiple souls, not just the brain. One of these souls is earthly, but others are connected to sacred worlds. There are souls that are intertwined with the patron god, the ethnic god, the solar god, and even corn. In the case of animals, they display behavioral qualities that can be shared with humans. Thus, calendarical records also result in complete codes and catalogs that describe zoological characteristics and attributes representing the gods along with their nature, enabling them to act in the world. Animals, therefore, are fundamental companions to human beings and coexist in a determining relationship with each person, blending together in a kind of intimate coessence that explains the shared aspects of all existence among living beings. But traditions and myths also speak to us about animated beings of a vegetal and mineral nature. Places also possess a soul, and therefore, a balanced and respectful relationship must be established with all things and objects because they harbor supernatural forces and can be guardians of all the places in the universe. However, the creatures and entities that populate the world are neither superior nor inferior, nor eternal, nor do they demand subordination. The gods, or forces of nature, in their mysterious dynamism, rather appear and disappear. They present themselves to benefit or harm. In all their manifestations, the deities belong to the realm of the changing and are part of the cycles of life and death. The natural forces or pre-Hispanic deities inhabit the world in its three planes of reality: the celestial world, the earth, and the underworld, which together form a spiritual topography or sacred geography because they belong to the mysterious world where they rule as beings constituted by other substances. However, they have the ability to intrude into our lives permanently to affect us in one way or another. In the celestial level, the dual pair conceives a couple of creator gods and sustainers of the firmament, Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca, and they in turn unfold into more deities to support them in their daily tasks. In the earthly plane, the goddess Coatlicue or Tlaltecutli awaits to receive the bodies that will be devoured and then return because they are givers of life above all else. In the underworld, the couple of the dead also awaits their offerings in exchange for the final rest. The myths narrate the actions of the gods and their ways of relating to each other and to all other beings. It is through the rules of the ritual that the necessary encoding is contained, allowing access to the identity and structure of the primordial stories that reveal paradigms and laws for living in society. Within these conceptions that explain the Mesoamerican universe, the elements of nature are conceived as living creatures that create and destroy, that work for the reproduction of life and therefore need food, rest, relief, and collaboration. They are participants, along with society, in the search for cosmic balance within which exchanges and reciprocal agreements are established. Humans, in turn, offer their cooperation with the animistic entities that populate the various cosmic planes to achieve the proper functioning of reproductive cycles. Therefore, natural elements cannot be exploited in any way, as there is a relationship with ecosystems based on interaction and permanent interconnection. It is, therefore, a holistic vision of a dynamic world where complex networks of collaboration are formed for the coexistence of all living entities. Sun and Earth. The biological and agricultural process that formed the cereal was accompanied by the conceptualization of other natural elements involved in that activity. Its regenerative power, resulting from the intertwining of the plant with the earth and the water, was complemented by another creative and governing force, the same one that ordered the cosmic spaces. This force is the sun and its movements in the sky. They traced an original square, as if they were the boundaries of the universe, and a center where the regions would intersect. Thus, a geometric space was conceived, which replicated itself on multiple earthly scales and, among them, in the more specific and familiar space of the milpa, cornfield. In this way, the territory was also represented by the apparent movement of the sun, along with its directions and limits across the firmament. It materializes in the petate, mat, which extends in the 4 directions and symbolizes a single territorial unit. The entire surface of the earth is surrounded by water. It is the Anahuac. The earth and the sun would be, therefore, the 2 engendering forces of the plant, and along with them, the origins of the cosmos as a whole were conceived. Thus, in Mesoamerican civilization, the god of corn was born, and it was equated with the ruler who had to balance that relationship between human beings and the forces of nature for the continuous reproduction and well-being of the social group. Life and death. The earth itself was conceived as a living being that periodically opened its depths to receive the seed, and return it transformed into fruit. Thus, in a sort of dyad or triad, along with the rain, the corn plant in conjunction with the earth constituted the indispensable elements in agricultural practice. Whether it was one of its elements separately or the entire process as a whole, they symbolized creation indistinctly, which included the death and resurrection of life, or in other words, absolute fertility. The indigenous world is one that organizes and reorganizes itself after catastrophes or destructions. The world is, therefore, a product of repeated, transformed creations, but always reworked based on the vestiges of the ancestors that must be venerated. Quetzalcoatl set the example and left us this teaching as the deity who knew the secrets of the underworld and immersed himself in its depths. Inside, once the bones of ancestors from past eras were found, the Creator God gathered and mixed them with his own life-giving liquid so that, in a sacred blend, the seed could be introduced and planted. The yield that the earth provides is a result of the work of the gods together with the dead from other ages, so they must be revered, nourished, and rewarded for their labor. What happens every year when they visit us to offer them their favorite dishes and meals is to illuminate their paths back to the underworld, where the cycle of death and life will begin again once more. In reality, it is the earth itself that, as a living and life-generating being, embraces the progenitors of peoples as well as the dead who return to its womb. Thus, the ancestors are mythical beings who exist in the world of death, but manifest themselves visibly as the stones that are installed in the landscapes of Mexico to occupy a definite place. However, life is fertilized in the underworld. The place of the dead is the womb of the earth, and therefore, death is a cosmic necessity par excellence. Myths tell us that the majority of people went to Mictlan when they died. But there are other regions or realms in the world where the deceased are also distributed. Distinct regions like houses or repositories, from where they continue to contribute the necessary vital energy to the engine of the universe. Only in the end, with the decomposition of the body, does regeneration come in new forms. It is through rituals and the corresponding offerings that life in the world is animated and reactivated. Chapter 4. Worldviews of Indigenous Peoples of Mexico. The sacred geography of the indigenous world. Everyone has a worldview, a perception of the world and the universe. In contrast, ancient peoples had an integral and holistic outlook that included not only human beings, but also animals, celestial bodies, and the entire natural world. This is a model of the world filtered through their culture and millennia-old heritage. where the essence lies in the human connection with the universe through beliefs, emotions, knowledge, behaviors, attitudes, and this philosophy of life, which seeks to comprehend the place of women and men within the cosmos, encompasses everything that the human mind can imagine. Then come the material forms that this world adopts, which we structure based on what we learn from an early age: maternal culture, food, language, home, and surroundings. Mesoamerican societies had a concept that encompassed a structured and ordered whole, but not only in a religious sense. Rather, in the context of the connection with the environment, including the sky and the waters. Hence the worship of natural elements such as hills or caves, for example. Through the observation of the stars or working with the land, a more intuitive, yet no less rational, understanding of the world was developed, giving rise to a body of knowledge that is still put into practice and functions among rural communities. The interpretation we give to the world, along with its functioning, is part of a need to understand humanity within its own environments. Thus, in each community inhabiting certain latitudes, a process of constructing a shared vision of the universe begins, and the human being starts observing themselves in phases, from their own body to the most abstract, which are their own ideas regarding other beings and objects that inhabit the same space. However, this Indo-American civilization and its peoples in the territory that is now Mexico developed complex explanatory structures based on belief systems that span long periods of time, centuries, and even millennia. And although the European conquest interrupted the systematization of knowledge by destroying certain scientific and spiritual practices, some knowledge persisted among the more rural segments of society, precisely among those who remained closely connected to their land and ancestral traditions of indigenous heritage. Pre-Hispanic cosmology generated a system of visible references in the surrounding environment whose signs are interpreted to order communal life. Thus, the natural environment in which indigenous peoples thrive has become, on one hand, a field of action for the social interaction of their communities, and on the other hand, a form of knowledge that contains the explanation of the cosmos, albeit expressed through symbolic forms. Vital balance and respect for nature's cycles. All aspects of physical space are the fundamental component of indigenous cosmologies. Movements and life cycles are possible and explained to the extent that the sky is observed, the land is blessed, the mountains are venerated, and water is cared for. The entire material world is a complex, a cosmic unity, a circuit through which the fire of volcanoes and the waters of the sea, springs, rivers, lagoons, and rain contained in the clouds circulate during their movements. Within the great planetary hydrological cycle, all physical phenomena are involved. For example, the sacred mountain, where water-laden clouds rest, becomes the great container and reservoir of life-giving liquid. Simultaneously, the rains are transported by the mountains to be transformed and irrigate Mexican fields, and they also filter into the depths of the earth to reappear through openings in the form of springs. The great observers of these life cycles are the rural communities of Mexico. Ritual specialists establish a network that connects caves, trees, and mountains as portals that communicate between different planes of the cosmos. The sacred mountain, since Olmec times, rises among wetlands, and its deity becomes the caretaker and maintainer of the place, along with the balance of its ecosystem for the well-being of the community. The owners of natural places are demanding. In exchange for their provisions, wealth, and natural resources, they require care, protection, offerings, and respect. The indigenous peoples of Mexico believe and know that fertility and life depend on nature. The mountain stores provisions, and its owner, Tlaloc, is the one who can periodically share and distribute them in exchange for the active collaboration of the entire community. In summary, tradition preserves the cultural codes that mark the ways of contributing, venerating, and respecting each of the elements that work in vital balance. Likewise, the portals of the earth allow connection with other layers of the cosmos, such as caves, cenotes, trees, and mountains that are linked to the origins of water, and, therefore, to the ability to keep human beings alive and working. The underworld is the home of the ancestors who visit us periodically, while the various levels of the sky are inhabited by deities that sustain the firmament and prevent its collapse. Tlaloc, along with its helpers, grants rainfall if the request is made correctly, allowing for the preparation of planting and the growth of plants and fruits within the agricultural cycle. Festivals mark these moments to celebrate the first corn and bountiful harvests. Just as in the Mesoamerican religious world, contemporary traditional ceremonies still enable social cohesion and the continuity of Mexico's different ethnicities. These religious practices encompass a sacred universe of animistic forces that act in our world through reciprocal exchanges, offerings, and periodic deliveries, with the purpose of seeking agricultural production, the reproduction of a social group, and the well-being of all living beings. Popular religiosity is still based on practical experience in relation to everything that happens in the physical environment. So the system of values and beliefs of communities is based on knowledge and derived from this relationship. These explanations about the natural world have become myths and narratives that are still told among the people, recounting the origin and functioning of the sacred world. Furthermore, within the explanation of its structure, there are notions of space, time, and the directions of the universe, the sky and the earth, water and mountains, climate and meteorology. Foundational myths and contemporary stories harmonize with the worship of the duality of natural forces to interpret the world as an organic entity in which we all participate and coexist. The indigenous worldviews to this day have a connection with nature that allows them to maintain environmental balance, whether to control or, if necessary, anticipate and regulate certain natural phenomena as much as possible. By reverencing and respecting the elements and events of the physical world, as if it were a play of opposing forces, they are enabling them to act in favor of the preservation of life on the planet. Indigenous cosmogonies narrate it this way: the world was created and humanity was conceived from a mountain, a cave, a tree, or from the earth itself in the form of a crocodile. From its jaws, the ancestors emerged to begin counting time and keeping track from the day of creation, thus celebrating the beginning of life. The gods created the world, living beings, and the laws that govern them, in exchange for receiving veneration and offerings in return. In this way, both gods and living beings work and contribute to their existence in the world. It is in the ritual practices that one lives according to the logic dictated by origin myths and the laws that stem from their principles of duality: day and night, masculine and feminine, cold and hot, life and death. Reciprocity with the sacred beings that populate the cosmos consists of paying homage, providing sustenance, and then awaiting their reciprocation of vital energy. The movement that allows for the alternation of opposing forces and that generate Nawi Ojin, the world that moves with the wind. The pyramid, the tree, the volcano, and the cosmos. The force of Huehueteotl, or the old god, emerges when the gods of creation transform the world with fire, so that the cosmos and its inhabitants are alive and suffer perpetual changes, just like the movements produced by active volcanoes. The pyramid is its imitation. It is the artificial mountain that represents the centrality of the world. The main buildings of a pre-Hispanic urban core are also a model of the cosmos. The Tlachihualtepetl of Cholula represents the sacred mountain that myths have named Tonacatepetl. This is the divine hill of sustenance that holds within it corn and primordial waters. On the other hand, the Templo Mayor, or Way Teocalli of Tenochtitlan, was a projection of the sacred mountain and a materialized replica of the components of the surrounding landscape of Lake Texcoco and the Basin of Mexico. The heart, owner, and ruler of the sacred mountain was Tlaloc, and as the god of rain, earth, and water, or the entire hydrological cycle, he summarized and reenacted the ancient peasant worship of the earth, encompassing the agricultural phases and fertility itself. Beneath the mountain, there are portals that take the form of caves, where water and springs flow. It was believed that inside and beneath the hill, there was a great treasure vault or a troje that guarded aquatic riches like seeds. It was also the enormous jaws of the monster that devoured goods and was called Tamuanchan, which means place of mist, but also heaven and its counterpart, the underworld. This place is all places of origin, Chicomostoc or Toyan, the mix from which the indigenous peoples migrate, the lineages that populate the territory of Mexico. There was also an underground paradise called Tlalocan, the abode of the guardian of the most precious goods. Its ruler is the owner of the hill, the heart of the mountain. In some way, Tlaloc's functions extended to the summit of the highest peaks in the landscape and to the sky, where it reaches through the tree that serves as a connecting bridge and a motor that powers and strengthens the movement of opposites, fire and water, and thus maintains the stability of the cosmos. Sacralizing the natural elements is a practice and belief that still persists today. The landscape of the Basin of Mexico, along with its volcanic and hydrological characteristics, is revered, and its worship is summarized in the figure of the sacred mountain, which also contains the fire and water that enable the dynamism of the world. For example, the Popocatépetl volcano, affectionately nicknamed Don Goyo, must be visited every year by the surrounding communities to receive its messages and gifts through an exchange of offerings within a ritual context. Another example is the twisted tree, which is hollow, serving as a post or axis mundi that mobilizes the forces circulating in the world, from the sky to the underworld. The tree at the center of the world, whether it be a cornstalk, an ahuehuete tree, a ceiba, or even a prickly pear cactus, projects in 4 directions, representing 4 gods, 4 corn plants, 4 colors, 4 tlaloques, or 4 birds. These entities carry, distribute, and share their natural benefits and riches with all peoples. The temple represents the central axis of cosmic space, the sacred tree, Tamuanchan, growing over a bed of water channels. Tlalocan, which are connected by the earth's surface, acting as a portal, a mouth of a monster, or a crocodile-like being, Zipatli Tlaltecutli. The temple or central axis connects the cosmic spaces, including the sky, the earth, and the underworld. It has 2 openings, the cave being one, the branches of the trees being the other, through which all the sacred geography is gathered and tied together. The product that comes to light are the flowers, representing the different ethnicities that blossom to spread out and populate the regions, taking their own place in the world under the guidance of Quetzalcoatl, the patron god of humanity. The indigenous peoples of Mexico venerate the entire earth, but from their own specific and local perspective. They intuit, know, believe, and observe that the part affects the whole, and that the whole impacts the part. They understand that everything is interconnected and interrelated within the vital cycles that move the cosmos, which consists of multiple levels. As long as our elements remain healthy and energized, cosmic balance will govern, allowing the miracle of life to unfold.
End of the part 2.